On the morning of October 11th, 2019, a district wildlife officer named Cass Trigg, 38 years old, drove up a logging spur off Route 20 in Nicholas County, West Virginia, and found the last documented dogman in the county lying dead in the mud at the edge of a fire road. The dogman was over 7 feet long, from snout to hip. It had the head of a wolf, a long snout and high-pointed ears. But the shoulders and arms were built like a man's, and the hind legs were digitigrade backward jointed, made for running. The fur was rust brown, going to charcoal along the spine. There was a torn notch in the top of its left ear. Trigg had never seen a dogman standing. He was seeing one dead. He did not shoot it. Nothing he carried could have. Whatever killed the dogman left tracks in the soft ground around the body, and Trigg's own body cam recorded them before the county came and taped the scene and took the file away from him. The tracks were not from a wolf, or a bear, or a man in boots. They were bare, they were bipedal, they were over 20 inches long, and there were no claws. This is what was in the file Dermot Koveric left behind, and what Cass Trigg added to it before the county closed it for good. I inherited Koveric's caseload in the spring of 2016, when he put in his papers and left the district without much of a goodbye. The other officers said he had gotten strange his last year. Jumpy. Spent too much time up in the high country logging animal deaths that did not need logging. I took his desk and his truck and a gray accordion folder that was heavier than it had any right to be. I did not open it for 2 months. When I finally did, it was because of the elk. The first entry in Koveric's folder was dated August of 2011. A cow elk, adult, found dead on a bench above Muddlety Creek. He had photographed it from 6 angles. The animal had not been eaten. It had been opened along the spine and left, which is not how anything in these woods feeds. Bears eat what they kill. Coyotes scatter a carcass and drag pieces off and come back for more. Whatever had done this had killed for the doing of it and walked away, and it had walked away on 2 legs. Koveric had written 1 line at the bottom of the report in pen, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. 2 sets of tracks. He had underlined the word 2. I read it as a bear. Everybody reads their first strange thing as a bear. You have to be shown the pattern before you can see it, and I had not been shown anything yet. I put the elk report back in the folder and went about my spring, and for 2 more months that folder sat in my truck and I did not think about it. And I have wondered since whether Koveric left it deliberately hard to open, whether the 2 months of silence was a kindness he built into it, so that whoever came after him would get one last quiet season before it started. The second entry I read that first night was the one that should have warned me sooner. It was dated the spring of 2012, and it was not an animal at all. It was a hiker. A man Koveric identified only by his case number had come off the Pocahontas Trail badly shaken and reported to a district officer that he had watched, from across a ravine, something large and dark stand up out of a deadfall where he had assumed there was a bear, and that it had not stood the way a bear stands. It had stood the way a man stands, all at once, straightening, and it had been holding something. The hiker could not say what. He said only that it had held the thing, the way a person holds a tool, and that it had looked across the ravine at him for a long moment before it turned and went uphill without hurry. And that the woods on that whole slope had gone silent in a way he had never heard woods go silent before. Koveric had filed it under nuisance bear and written nothing at the bottom, but he had kept it. Out of 100 nuisance bear reports, he had kept exactly this one in the folder with the dead animals. And when I read it that first night, I did not understand why. I understood later. He had kept it because it was the only time in 5 years that anyone had seen the top of it standing up. And even then, they had not been allowed to see what it was. It was Sela Brandt who showed me the first body. Sela ran a trailhead concession down at the bottom of the fork, coffee and firewood, and bad advice for tourists. And she called the district line herself on a Tuesday in June of 2016 because she had found something behind her woodshed and she did not want it on her property 1 more hour. I drove down, expecting a deer. What was behind the shed was not a deer. It was a dogman. The wolf head, the man's arms, the long backward legs. Over 7 feet if you straightened it out. The rust and charcoal fur was matted with old blood along one flank, and the top of its left ear was torn in a clean notch. The dogman had been dead 3 or 4 days. Something had broken it, not bitten it, not clawed it, broken it. The way you would break a stick across your knee, and the break was in the middle of the back, where nothing has the leverage to break a thing that size. Sela stood a good distance off, with her arms crossed, and asked me what it was. I told her I did not know, which was the truth. And I told her I would take it, which was a lie, because when I came back with the truck and a tarp the next morning, it was gone. The ground where the Dogman had lain was smooth, brushed almost, as if something had crouched there and swept the dirt with its hands, while it lifted the body. And pressed into the soft dirt at the edge of the tree line, headed uphill, were 2 bare footprints, bipedal, longer than my forearm, with no claw marks at the front of the toes. I asked Sela that morning whether she had heard anything in the night. She said she had heard her dogs go quiet, not bark. Go quiet, all 3 of them at once, around 2 in the morning, and stay quiet, pressed up under her porch until it was light. She said in 11 years at the fork, she had never known all 3 to be silent at the same time. And she said it, the way you say a thing you have decided not to think about again. I stood at the tree line a long time. Then I went home and I opened the whole folder. Koveric had logged 11 of them between 2011 and 2016. Not 11 sightings. 11 bodies. 11 of the wolf-headed creatures, all found dead, all found broken or opened in ways that did not match any predator in the state. And beside every one of them, in his cramped underlined hand, the same note, 2 sets of tracks. The Dogman was not the top of the food chain in these woods. The Dogman was prey in these woods. And Koveric had watched it be hunted for 5 years and never said the word out loud in any report. Because there is no word you can put in a state file for what leaves a 20-inch bare footprint and breaks a Dogman's spine and carries the body off before morning. I want to lay out those 11 the way Koveric laid them out, because the order is the whole story. The first 4, from 2011 and 2012, were all high. Muddlety Creek, the head of Powell Mountain. A saddle up on the Webster Line where no road goes. All of them above 4,000 feet. All of them deep, the kind of country you have to want to get to. Koveric had marked each one on a topographic map he kept folded in the back of the folder, small red dots, and the first 4 dots were all clustered up along the spine of the range, where the Dogmen would have denned and hunted and been left alone by every living thing except the one that was coming for them. The next 4, from 2013 and 2014, were lower. Not by much. A few hundred feet of elevation, a mile or 2 closer to a road. But the pattern was unmistakable on the map. The red dots were walking downhill. The kills were following the range down toward the valleys, year over year, as steady as water finding its level. And the last 3 that Koveric logged, in 2015 and the winter he quit, were lower still, close enough to hear an engine. And the final dot he ever made was beside a hunting camp off the Somersville side, with a date, and beneath it, the only thing on the map that was not a location. He had written, small, do not follow it. And then he had underlined it, the way he underlined 2, hard enough to tear the paper. I sat with that map until the light came up. The dots made a line, and the line came down off the mountain, and the front of the line, the newest dots, was pointed straight at the towns. There was one entry in the middle of the folder that did not fit the neat downhill line, and it bothered me for a long time before I understood it. It was dated the summer of 2014, and it was not a kill at all. It was a survey. Koveric had gone up onto a high saddle where 2 of his early red dots sat close together, and he had spent, by his own notes, 3 days up there alone, camped, doing nothing but watching and writing, and what he had written was a census. He had counted Dogman sign, methodically, the way you would count anything you were afraid was disappearing. So many game trails with the 4-toed prints, so many cached kills, so many marked trees where they had raked the bark. He had filled 2 pages with tallies, and at the bottom he had done the arithmetic. And he had written a number, and the number was small. And beside it, he had written that 3 years earlier, the same saddle would have shown him 4 times as much. He was not logging deaths anymore by 2014. He was taking inventory of a species while it went down. The way a man counts the last of something, so that at least the count will exist after the thing does not. And on the last page of the survey, he had written a sentence that I have read more times than any other in the folder. He had written that in 3 days, on that saddle he had not once found the flat bear prints, and that their absence up there, in the last good Dogman country, did not comfort him at all, because it meant the hunter had already been through, and had already taken what it wanted from the high ground, and had already moved down to where the counting would be easier. I drove up to that same saddle myself 2 years after I read the survey, with Koveric's tallies in my hand to compare. I spent one afternoon, not 3 days, because one afternoon was all it took. There was no sign to count, not a track, not a cache, not a marked tree. The saddle where Koveric had counted the last real population of them in 2014 had by 2016 nothing on it at all. And I stood there with 2 pages of a dead man's arithmetic in my hand and understood that I was not going to be logging a species. I was going to be logging the end of one. The entry that told me the folder was not just a record, was dated by Koveric to the fall of 2013. And it was the one that told me the folder was a map in more than one sense. Koveric had written up a kill on the north face of Powell Mountain. A dogman, young by its size, found at the base of a rock slide with its throat gone. And he had noted the particular way the ground was disturbed above it. A wide, flat area of scuffed leaf litter, as if something heavy had crouched and waited. He had drawn a little diagram. The wait, then the drop, then the drag uphill. He had written beside it that the crouch marks were 8 feet from the kill, and that whatever had made them had covered those 8 feet in a single movement. Because there were no steps in between, just a flat crushed place, and then the body. I found the same arrangement myself 11 days after I read that entry. Not on Powell Mountain. Lower, on a bench above the Goldie Road, close enough to hear the trucks. A dogman, throat gone. And above it, the wide, flat, scuffed place where something had crouched and waited, exactly the way Koveric had drawn it 3 years before. And the crouch marks were 8 feet from the body, and there were no steps in between. The kill was the same. The technique was the same, down to the distance. The location was lower. Whatever was doing the killing was working its way down off the high country, and it was pushing the dogmen down ahead of it. And Koveric had written the method down in 2013. So precisely that I could stand in it in 2016 and measure it with my own boots and understand that I was not investigating a series of deaths. I was following a hunter down a mountain, 3 years behind, reading the notes of a man who had been following it before me. The next one I found on my own was in September of that year, and it was the one that taught me the hunter was not only strong but careful, in a way that frightened me more than the strength had. A hunting guide named the location to the district. A dogman dead in a creek bottom off the Peters mountainside, and I went in expecting the pattern I knew, the broken back, the flat prints, the drag uphill. The broken back was there, but this one had not been dragged. This one had been arranged. I do not have a better word for it. The dogman had been laid out on a flat rock beside the creek, on its back, its long arms folded down against its sides. Its head turned to face up the mountain. Nothing scavenges a body onto its back, on a rock, and folds its arms. Nothing in nature does that. It had been placed deliberately with what I can only call attention, and the flat bare prints were all around the rock. And one clear print was pressed into the sandbar directly at the head of the body, facing it. As if whatever had done this had stood over the dogman. It killed and looked down at it for a while before it left. I have thought about that arrangement for years, and I have never landed anywhere comfortable. A thing that kills for territory does not lay its rivals out and fold their arms. That is not hunting. That is something else. That's something with a meaning behind it that I do not have the standing to guess at. And the only thing I am sure of is that whatever left that print at the head of the rock was not a stupid animal clearing its range. It knew exactly what it was doing, and it had done it before, and it would do it again. And it wanted the next person who came up the creek to see the body the way it had left it. Arms folded, face to the mountain, up small on the rock under the trees. I logged it, I put a red dot on my sheet, and I did not tell the hunting guide what I thought, because there was nothing I could have said that would not have sounded like a man who had gotten strange his last year. I started keeping my own map after that. I got the same kind of topographic sheet, and I put my own dots on it, in a different color, so I would not confuse them with his, and I laid my sheet over his against a window with the light behind them both. His dots and mine made one line. There was no seam where his years ended and mine began. It was one long walk downhill, and it did not care which officer was writing it down. That was the summer they started coming down where people were. Emil Doss ran cattle on a lease up the Cherry River, and Emil was not a man who called anybody about anything, which is why I believed him. He called the district in July because something had been in with his stock 2 nights running, and it was not a coyote, and it was not a bear, and he had seen it in his headlights, and he needed me to know it was walking on 2 legs when it ran. I sat in Emil's kitchen, and he described it to me, and every word out of him was the Dogman, the wolf head, the height, the way it went up on the back legs to clear his fence and ran off bent forward into the dark. But Emil kept saying one thing that did not fit the stories people tell about these creatures. He kept saying it was scared. The Dogman was not hunting his cattle. It was hiding among them. It came in low and fast, and it stayed against the far tree line. And when his dog started up, it did not attack the dog. It ran, and it ran wrong. Looking back over its shoulder the whole way at the mountain, it had come down from. Emil walked me out to the fence in the morning and showed me where it had come through. The top rail was not broken. It had been lifted off its pins and set down in the grass, careful, by something that did not want the noise of breaking it. And then the Dogman had gone over the gap. Emil said that was the part that had kept him up. Not that a Dogman had been in his field. That the Dogman had been quiet. That something that size had wanted, more than anything, not to be noticed, and had taken the time to lift a rail rather than crash a fence, because it was listening the whole time for something behind it on the mountain. I had spent months thinking of the Dogman as the top of everything in these woods. Emil Doss watched one hide in his cattle, like a rabbit in tall grass, and lift a rail so as not to make a sound. And I drove home understanding that the most dangerous animal in West Virginia was terrified of something, and that the something was still up the mountain, and that it was coming this way, one dead Dogman at a time. The second person to see a living one that summer was a boy. He was 14, and he was fishing the cranberry alone below his family's place. And he told me, with his mother in the room and her hand on his shoulder the whole time, that a Dogman had come down to the water on the far bank at dusk, and had not seen him. It had drunk from the river like a deer, on all fours, folded down awkward because its front legs were made to be arms. And then, he said, it had frozen, not because of him, it had frozen looking upstream, up toward the high country, and it had stayed frozen for a long time, with the water running off its jaw, and then it had gone back up the bank on 2 legs, fast, low, and it had not run downstream away from whatever it was afraid of. It had run across the slope, sideways. The way an animal runs when it knows it cannot outrun a thing directly, and is only trying to get out of the open. The boy asked me if it was going to come to their house. I told him no, which I hoped was true. What I did not tell him was that it had run sideways instead of down, and that sideways only buys you time. And that everything in Koveric's folder said the line only went one direction, and that direction was down, toward the boy, toward the water he fished, toward the light in his kitchen window. The reports stopped being rare after that. Through the back half of that summer, the district line rang with them, and every one was the same shape once you learned to hear it. A woman on the Craigsville Road, who woke to find her trash untouched, and her motion light burning, and a Dogman standing at the edge of her yard with its face to the woods, not toward the house at all, as if the house were behind it and the danger were in the trees. A pair of loggers who watched one cross a haul road in daylight, in the open, in the middle of the afternoon, which no animal that wants to live does, unless whatever is behind it is worse than being seen. A church fund full of kids on a camp trip, who saw one drink from a roadside spring, and did not run from the van, did not startle at the engine, only lifted its head and looked up the mountain and went back to drinking, because the van was not what it was afraid of. I drove to all of them, and I filled out the reports, and I watched the same understanding arrive on face after face. These were not people who had read Koveric's folder. They did not know about the flat prints or the broken backs or the line of red dots coming down the range. They only knew what they had seen, which was a Dogman that was afraid. And every one of them said some version of the same thing to me before I left, which was that they could handle a dangerous animal in the woods. They had lived with dangerous animals all their lives, but they did not know what to do with a dangerous animal that was more scared than they were, because it meant the woods had something in them that even a Dogman would run from. I did not have anything to tell them either. I wrote it all down. The reports went in the folder. My colored dots went on the map, and the map kept saying the same thing it had always said. down, down, toward the roads, toward the porch lights, toward the people who thought the worst thing in these mountains was the dogman standing frightened at the edge of their yard. I found the flat prints fresh only once. It was the middle of August, dry, the kind of dust on the fire roads that holds a print like plaster. I had gotten a report of ravens working a spot up, a closed spur off the Somersville side, and I hiked in expecting another body 3 or 4 days gone. What I found was a dogman still warm. Its chest was open. The blood on the ground had not gone brown. Whatever had done it inside the hour, and for the first time in all of this, I understood that I was not behind the hunter. I was near it. The flat prints were everywhere. Bare, bipedal, over 20 inches, sunk deep into the dust because whatever made them was heavy in a way nothing that walks upright should be. They came down the spur, they circled the kill, and they went back up, and the stride going up was longer than the stride coming down. Which meant whatever had made them had left in a hurry, which meant it had heard me coming. I stayed at that kill longer than I should have, because it was the first one warm enough to actually read, and what it told me changed how I understood everything that came before it. This dogman had fought. The ground for 30 feet around was torn up, deep gouges where its long back legs had dug for purchase, and a young poplar snapped off at the base where something had been thrown against it, or had thrown itself. The other bodies I had seen were clean kills, quick, a single break. This one had been given a chance to run, or had been played with, and had turned and fought for its life against whatever came down that spur, and had lost anyway, completely. Its chest opened as easily in the end as if the fight had never happened. That was the thing I could not get out of my head on the hike out. The fight had not mattered. A creature that could break a grown man in half without effort. A creature that ran cattle and terrified loggers, and made 3 dogs go silent under a porch, had fought as hard as anything fights, with everything it had, and it had made no difference at all to the outcome. Whatever came down that spur had let it fight, because the fight cost nothing. The gap between the dogman and the thing that hunted it was not the gap between a strong animal and a stronger one. It was the gap between a man and the weather. You can fight the weather all you want. I want to be careful here about what I did and did not see, because I have thought about it every day since, and I will not add to it. I did not see the hunter. I saw where it had crouched, a wide flat crush of brush at the top of the spur. I saw the prints, and at the very top, where the spur bent into standing timber, I saw one of the young trees bent over and held, bent at chest height on me and higher than my head reached, bent and twisted, and not broken, the way you would bend a green sapling to mark a place. There was a tuft of coarse hair caught in the twist of it, going gray at the tips, and I did not touch it, and when I came back with a bag an hour later, it was gone. The way the body behind Sela's shed had been gone, the way everything this thing left behind had a way of being gone before it could become evidence. And past the bent tree, in the dark under the canopy, I had the strong and simple sense that the woods were occupied. That the quiet was not empty quiet. That something the size of the bent tree was standing very still in it, patient, waiting for me to be done and gone. I was done and gone. I am not ashamed to write that. I went back to the folder that night, looking for the entry I knew had to be there, and I found it. It was near the end of Koveric's records, dated the winter before he quit, and it was the only page in the whole folder where the writing stopped being a report. He had gone up after one of them in the snow, tracking a dogman that had been coming around a hunting camp, and he had found the dogman dead, and around it the flat prints, fresh. And Koveric had done what no report should ever admit to. He had followed the flat prints instead of leaving. He had gone up after the hunter itself. And half a page later, his handwriting changed, got bigger and looser, and he had written that it had let him follow, that it had waited for him at the top of each rise so he would keep coming, that it was not being tracked. It was walking him up the mountain the way a man walks a calf toward the pen. And that when he understood that, he had turned and run, and it had not chased him, because it did not need to. It had shown him what it wanted him to see, which was that it was there, and that it was patient, and that it had all the time in the world. There was one more line on that page, at the very bottom, and it was the line that made me put the folder down and not pick it up again for a week. Koveric had written that when he stopped running far down the mountain, out of breath, sure he had gotten away, he had looked back up the slope. And it had been standing at the tree line above him. Not close. Just standing, watching him go, making sure he understood that the distance between them existed because it was allowed to exist. Then it had turned and gone back up into the high country, back toward the work it was doing. And Koveric had gone home and put in his papers 11 days later. I understood, reading that page, that he had not gotten strange. He had gotten correct. By the fall of 2019, there were almost none of them left to come down. I want to say that plainly because it is the part that still keeps me up. For 8 years, first Koveric and then me, we logged a wolf-headed creature that the whole world would tell you cannot exist. And across those 8 years, the number of dogmen in this county dropped from a population that left sign on every ridge to a handful, to a few, to one. Something had gone through these mountains and emptied them. Not driven them off, emptied them. The way you empty a field. I know it was emptied and not abandoned because of the sign or the loss of it. When I started in 2016, the high country was full of dogman track. Kills of their own, deer taken and cached, the big four-toed prints on every muddy bench, scat, hair on the bark where they had passed. That is a population. By 2018 there was almost none of it, and what there was all low, all pushed down against the roads, as if the whole species had been swept off the top of the mountain with a broom and piled at the bottom. And through all of it, over all of it, the flat bare prints, going up and down the range, unhurried, thorough, the sign of something that was not in a rush because it knew it was going to finish. Ren Calicot lived alone at the end of a county road up past Mount Nebo, and Ren called me in September because there was a dogman on her porch and it would not leave, not attacking. On her porch, pressed into the corner by the door, up against the light, and it stayed there through the night while she watched it through the glass. And in the morning, it was still there, and she said the thing she could not get past was that it kept looking back at the woods. It had come down out of the trees to the nearest light and the nearest human being it could find, and it had put its back to the wall, and it had stood there all night facing the mountain. And Ren said, and I wrote this down word for word, that it looked like a dog that had been left outside a house it did not belong to, waiting to be let in somewhere, anywhere, that was not out there. Ren said it made a sound near dawn, only once, not a howl. A low sound, she said. More like a moan, the kind of sound a big animal makes when it is past being afraid and into something worse. And that when it made the sound it was not looking at her and not looking at the woods, but up the mountain, at the high dark line of it, against the first grey light. And then it had gone, off the porch and across her yard and into the trees. Not up toward the mountain, but along the road, downhill, toward town, toward more light. And she had watched it out of sight, and then she had sat down on her kitchen floor and not gotten up until it was full day. It was gone before I arrived. There were no flat prints at Ren's, only the dogman's own, coming down out of the trees fast, and stopping at her steps, as if her porch light were the last safe place on the mountain, which, by then, it may have been. I followed its tracks along the road, the way it had gone, downhill, until they left the shoulder and cut into a culvert, and I lost them there. And I stood on the empty road a long time, thinking about a creature that could break a man in half, choosing to spend its last strength getting closer to men, because men were less frightening than what was behind it. I found the last den in October, a week before the body on the fire road. It was up under a rock overhang on the Nicholas and Webster line, and it was clearly where they had been, more than one of them, over a long time. There were old bones and a smell that had soaked into the stone, and there were smaller prints among the big ones, young ones, which meant that at some point, up here, there had been not just dogmen, but dogman young, a family of them, a future. And it was empty, cleared, abandoned, and in a wide ring, all the way around the mouth of it, pressed into every soft place in the ground, were the flat, bare prints. Not one set, many over many visits. Something had found the last place they had, the last place they raised their young, and it had come back, and back, and back, until there was no reason to come back anymore. I went into the den as far as I could, on my hands and knees, with my light. Far back, wedged in a crack, in the stone, where a small one might have hidden, I found a single bone, and I do not know what it was from, and I did not bring it out. And I have thought since that the last of them had understood what was coming and had tried to hide their young in the deepest part of the stone. and that it had not been deep enough, because nothing on that mountain was deep enough, because whatever was hunting them was patient, and it had all the time in the world, and stone does not tire, and neither did it. There was something else at the den, and I have gone back and forth about whether to include it, and I have decided I have to, because leaving things out is how a record becomes a story. On the flat stone at the mouth of the overhang, in the dust, someone had made a mark. Not the Dogman. The mark was made by the flat-footed hunter. I am sure of that, because its prints were all around it, and nothing else had been up there in a long time. It had pressed the side of its hand, or its foot, or something, into the dust in a way that was not a track. It was a shape, a deliberate shape, a long, shallow arc with two shorter arcs crossing it, and I photographed it before the wind could take it, and the photograph went into the file with everything else, and the county has it now, along with the rest. I am not going to tell you what I think the shape meant, because I do not know, and a man who tells you he knows what a mark like that means is a man who has decided to stop being careful. I will only say that it was made on purpose at the last place the Dogmen ever lived, by the thing that had spent 8 years emptying these mountains of them, and that it was made facing out, facing downhill, facing the direction the last of them had run. It was left for something to find. Whether it was left for me, or for the next officer, or for nothing human at all, I cannot say. I only know that the mind made it, and that the mind was patient, and that it wanted a mark to remain after the Dogman did not. The overhang faced downhill, toward the roads, toward the towns, toward the porch lights. I stood in the mouth of that empty den, and I understood which direction the last of them had run, and why, and what had been standing behind them the whole way down. Which brings me back to the morning of October 11th, 2019, and the fire road off Route 20, and the last documented Dogman in Nicholas County, dead in the mud. I got there because a road crew called it in as a dead bear. It was not a bear. It was over 7 feet of wolf-headed, man-shouldered Dogman with a torn notch in the top of its left ear, and it had come all the way down to the edge of a county fire road before whatever had been hunting its kind for 8 years finally closed the last of the distance. Its back was broken in the middle where nothing has the leverage. It had been running toward the road. It had almost made it to where the people were. Its front claws were dug into the mud in the direction of the pavement, still, as if it had been reaching for the road when it went down, as if the last thought in it had been that the road meant men and men were the one presence on the whole mountain that its hunter was not. My body cam was running the whole time before the county came, and it recorded what I have been describing to you. The tracks around the body, bare, bipedal, over 20 inches, no claws, coming down the fire road behind the Dogman, circling the place where it fell, pausing there. One long crouch, mark 8 feet back, exactly like Powell Mountain, exactly like the gully bench, and then leading back up the mountain in a stride longer than any man's, unhurried, the walk of something going home from a job that was finished. The county took the file. They took Koveric's folder and my reports and the body cam card, and they closed it as an animal death of undetermined cause. And I do not think anyone above the district level ever looked at the footage. Here is what the record shows for anyone who ever finds it. Over 8 years, 12 wolf-headed creatures were documented dead in one small county in West Virginia. None showed a wound from any known predator. None had been fed on. In every case, a second track was present, bare and bipedal and over 20 inches long, with no claw and a weight behind it that sank the print deeper than a man's could go. The deaths began high, above 4,000 feet, along the spine of the range, and over 8 years they moved down the mountain in a straight line, from the high benches toward the roads. And the living creatures moved down ahead of them, toward light and people, away from something above. And then the deaths stopped, because there was nothing left to kill. The wounds were not from teeth or claws. The bodies were carried, not eaten. Whatever made the tracks never showed itself to a camera, never left hair a lab could name. Never once let itself be seen doing the work it had come 8 years to finish. It cleared these mountains of the most dangerous animal anyone here had ever encountered. And it did it quietly. And it did it completely. And the only reason we know it happened at all is that 2 wildlife officers kept writing it down while it worked. I have thought a great deal about why it did this, and I do not have an answer I trust, only the shape of one. A thing does not spend 8 years and cross a whole range and hunt another apex predator to the last of its young unless that other predator is a threat to it, or a rival for the same country, or simply something it will not abide in the same woods. Whatever the reason, the judgment behind it was total. It did not thin the dogmen. It did not balance them. It ended them, root and branch, den and young. And then it stopped, because the work was done and there was nothing left to do. I still go up in the high country. The woods are quiet now in a way they were not when I started. No dogman sign in 6 years. No flat prints either, because there is no longer anything down here worth coming down for. But quiet is not the same as empty. I learned that from a bent green tree at the top of a fire spur, from the tuft of dark hair that was gone before I could bag it, from the wide flat place where something crouched and waited, from the page where Koveric wrote that it had stood at the tree line and watched him go and let the distance exist, because it chose to. Whatever it is still up there. It finished what it came to do, and it went home, and it is patient, and it has all the time in the world. And sometimes, standing on a high bench where one of Koveric's red dots used to be, I have the old feeling again, the one from the fire spur, that the quiet around me is not empty quiet, and I do not stay to find out whether I am right. Real or fake, you decide.